Welcome to Africa Speaks. I'm Pamela Anchang. I would like to welcome to Africa Speaks one of Africa's most prolific ambassadors bridging the continent and its diaspora. Co-founder and chairman of the Pan-African Council, Fabien Anthony is an international business executive, entrepreneur, and community leader of Caribbean heritage. Recognized as the global top 100 most influential people of African descent under 40, and winner of the Africa Top 100 Global Tourism Personalities in 2019, the charismatic polyglot who speaks English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Portuguese, and Creole is also the founder and executive director of the Global Advances Group, a unique consultancy that specializes in assisting entrepreneurs, corporations, government, and mission-driven organizations in the area of international trade and investment, sustainable development, technical capacity building, and international cooperation across 5 continents. So grateful to have you on the show, Mr. Fabien Anthony. Is it Fabien or Fabien?
Either way, it depends on the language you speak. If you speak French, you can say Fabien. If you speak English, you say Fabien.
So what are really your origins?
So I'll just say I'm Pan-Caribbean with
Okay.
a Pan-African soul. So
Ooh.
I have a Caribbean heritage. But
From where specifically?
from all over the Caribbean. So
I wanna know.
Barbados, St. Lucia, Haiti, Jamaica. I have quite spread out.
So you can do some reggae and you can do some zouk.
Some zouk, I can do some soca, some calypso.
Ooh,
the
some
whole thing.
compa.
The whole thing, yeah. the
See,
whole
I
thing.
got it down. I got it down. How did you, I know now you just explained that you come from all these places. Still, that doesn't explain why you're so fluent in all these languages. How did this happen?
Well, you know, my life journey was, first of all, I was in a very multilingual family. And I grew up speaking various languages, and I also moved around quite frequently in my life. I spent a lot of time in South America, in Asia, and then lately, over the past 10 years, in Africa. So I was in China for about 12 years, China and Taiwan.
So now you're currently based in Africa. Where,
Yes.
Where specifically, or any particular regions?
Currently, I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You describe yourself as a Pan-African soul.
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
I hope I'm paying attention. So what does that mean, Pan-African soul?
Well, when I look at what Pan-Africanism at its root attempted to do, if you look at what Pan-Africanism, it's easier to look at it from the perspective of what it's against and what it's for. So what is Pan-Africanism against? It's against, originally it was against slavery, right? Against colonialism and against racism, right? And what is it for? It's for unity, right? It's for self-determination, right? And it's for leadership, right? And those are the sorts of values that embody the movement, I believe, today, and embodies what I identify with as a person working in this movement.
So is there a difference between Pan-Africanism when it began and the way it is today? It's like, are you a new generation Pan-Africanist? Would you consider
Well,
that?
I think it has transformed. It has definitely morphed. If you look at what Pan-Africanism was in the beginning, it was about fighting against colonialism and slavery initially. But now we have a different kind of sort of colonialism. Our minds are often colonized, right? That's a different sort of colonialism. And slavery still exists in the form of economics. So the economic portion of it has changed just because now we're out of our shackles, right? And we're out of colonialism. Our economics still don't make sense for most of our communities and most of our countries today.
You do talk about the colonial mind. You think a lot of Africans have a colonial mindset?
Well, I think that we've been left with a legacy of paradigms that don't work for us, right? And we've bought into these paradigms, sometimes because we don't value our own indigenous paradigms, right? And I think that's an exercise that I would encourage every person of African descent, every person on the African continent, and actually every human being to explore what is that paradigm that actually works and fits my reality to improve my life and the life of my people around me and my community.
That's very true. And you're right about the paradigm shift. But I'm curious to know, because now we have, Africa is not a monolithic society. we are pretty much like the United States. You have people from India that have settled in Africa, light skin. We have white folks who live in Africa, so does Pan-Africanism exclude or include?
Well, Pan-Africanism has never been about really exclusion, right? Pan-Africanism is a movement that recognizes the crime against humanity, right? And that crime against humanity is plural in every way, right? And just as much as people have suffered from the paradigms that this, I would call late stage capitalism that we're in now, across the board, regardless of nationality. But what I think is that Pan-Africanism, in terms of looking specifically at black people, right, in sub-Saharan Africa, and the story of black people being migrated and brought into slavery into different parts of the world, is that we have an understanding of structural suffering that possibly nobody else on the planet has. And therefore, we can find the solutions that will truly work for humanity.
That's absolutely correct. However, I'm still going to press on this point because you may not think that way, that it excludes. But oftentimes I hear a lot of black people reflected more as, you know, yes, we've been discriminated against, and it's almost as if now we discriminate against the others. Have you experienced that, and how can we evolve as a people if we don't also treat the others that live with us and share that heritage?
Well, you know, I believe that once you are the victim of a system, right, the healing needs to happen in-house first before you can talk about including, because some people that you may include may not have the best agenda in mind for the village, right, for the community. I'll take the example of women that have suffered domestic violence, right? Women that have suffered domestic violence perhaps have support group with other women, and you wouldn't want a man to come into that situation and for you to feel comfortable and have those conversations. So I see the issues relating to people of African descent and Africans in a very similar fashion, right? We need to have that conversation amongst us first before we invite the rest of the world into the conversation.
You're right. Maybe then the perception is that they need to recognize that we need to heal and we're not excluding anybody. Absolutely. I'm glad you cleared that up. Let's talk about your organization, the Pan-African Council. Sure. What is it about?
So the Pan-African Council really started as a dream of taking the Pan-African values, which I alluded to earlier, and making those actionable, right? And what does that look like in terms of action? So we're a professional membership organization, action-oriented, that looks to foster cooperation between Africans on the continent and the diaspora in every sphere, so the political, economic, and social sphere.
Oh, so what kinds of activities do you guys engage in?
So we have a variety of activities. I'll start from the top. First, we do diaspora advocacy. So we work very closely with African governments and the African Union, specifically the CEDAW office of the African Union, in order to ensure that the conversation about Africa's development includes the diaspora element, right? We work closely with, for example, the Pan-Afest in Ghana, the Year of Return. We've sent delegations for the Year of Return as well. And that leads into our diaspora bridging. So we do what we call a horizontal integration of the diaspora, which means connecting those of us that were born in the diaspora to the African continent to gain knowledge about the African continent, and also Africans to know about the diaspora, because it's not just a unilateral thing, it's also a bilateral thing for us. And then we do a vertical integration in diaspora. So African Americans that don't know about Afro-Brazilians or Afro-Colombians, right, or the Caribbean culture. So we try to also have a lot of activities around culture, education, economic empowerment amongst our communities.
That's very good. I'm glad you touched on the African Union. I know that the diaspora is now the 6th region, right, of the African Union. How is that practically, though, being applied in terms of how do diasporans relate with the continent on a practical level? What are the resources or what's the infrastructure for that?
So the African Union, we have to understand that it is a supranational organization, right? Which means it's supposed to be looking at the greater picture. So there is no other larger organization for us to speak about diaspora issues. In fact, I personally feel it should be the mandate of the African Union to see how it could integrate the diaspora into the issues, into the development, and all the things that are going on the African continent. Specifically in terms of the actions that the African Union is taking, they've started now really engaging the diaspora in terms of evaluating how well countries are doing in integrating their diaspora. So they've developed, or in the process now of developing a diaspora scorecard, which means that if you're a country like Ghana, for example, we can now score you and measure how well have your efforts been in order to reach out and support the diaspora if they do come back home, right? And that would be a country that has scored very high. So they'll look across all of the continent and then see what that looks like. So I think it provides a regulatory framework. I see it less of an operational capacity, but actually setting the right policy and making the right recommendations in terms of what individual countries can do in integrating the diaspora.
So does it mean, how does the diaspora, because the diaspora is big, it's made up of people from different parts of the continent, spread all over the world. How are they represented at the Assembly or the African Union? Like if Cameroon or Ghana or someone from the Caribbean, are we all lumped into one block? And how do we channel our opinions or suggestions?
So they've lumped, the sixth region in general includes both what they call continental Africans and the historic diaspora, right? And also the word diaspora has often been misconstrued, I think, in some occasions. So you'll have, for example, a Nigerian citizen that perhaps lives in Ghana. Now, do you call that a diaspora? According to the African Union definition, you do not call that diaspora. That's a Nigerian community abroad or in a different country, right? But it's Africans living outside of the African continent with the special case of the historic diaspora. So an African American that moves to Ghana would still be considered diaspora within that context because he was born outside of the continent. So.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I had never thought about that. So, yeah, if you move from Nigeria to Ghana or to Cameroon, you are an African on the continent. You're not living out. It's being like people like us living out in the United States are diasporans.
Absolutely. And to give you a case in point in terms of policy, if you look at what Rwanda has done.
Yes.
Rwanda renamed their diaspora office to Rwandan Community Abroad, in line with the African Union definition,
Good.
Right? So they will consider diaspora in its plurality, and Rwandans that live abroad, they're called Rwandan Community Abroad.
Oh, that makes sense. I think that's good clarification. You'll be surprised that a lot of people won't think about these differences. I want to talk about why you're so influential. Because
influential.
It's true, you're one of people of African descent most influential. And you're founder and executive director of the Global Advances Group.
Correct. Yeah.
What is the vision behind this endeavor?
Well, I think influential is a relative term, right?
No,
because
you are influential. I mean, you're educating.
Yes, but I've dedicated a large part of my own successes in life towards community development and youth specifically, which is also a very important pillar in the Pan-African Council. And I think with the work that I've done with youth, especially youth of African descent throughout the world, everything from motivational speaking to exchanges, to conferences, to empowering their ideas, to financing their ideas, investing in the youth. Because as we know, Africa is going to be the future in terms of young people. We're talking about by 2050, a quarter of the planet will be African, many will be youth, and by 2100, half of the planet, right? So we have to let those numbers sink, and who is going to be leading the world in the future? If 1 out of 2 people are African, it's going to be the African youth of today, right? And so that's where my sort of focus has been.
Is that what Global Advances Group is? No, that's not really it.
No, that's with the Pan-African Council, but with Global Advances Group is a company that advises specifically on investments regarding sustainable, green, eco-friendly technologies, right, that enhance our economics, right, our collective economics. And we look at it, especially now with what's been developing in terms of technology, there's a lot of what we call closed loop systems, right? So we tend to invest in projects that provide our basic needs, right? Food security, shelter, clothing, energy, right, security. And so all of these combinations of technologies, I think, is what will really liberate us in the future. And that's what that company is focused on.
I mean, talk about being influential. And the thing about your influential capacity is that you're doing so many things. So let's learn. Let me learn a few things. If someone wanted to invest, because you do counsel investors, but entrepreneurs and governments and all these kinds of things, my gosh. So what tips could you give someone that's living in the United States that wants to go and invest in Africa, for example? What do they need to know?
Well, I would just look at the primary needs, right? And any entrepreneur that is seriously tackling the needs of the community, whether it be shelter, energy, food, clothing, right? To look at those opportunities and see how you can invest and empower those people. I think a lot of the problem is that our entrepreneurs, sometimes our brightest entrepreneurs, are not given enough spotlight, or they're unknown, right? And people tend to also want to only invest in things they know. So part of our initiatives at the Pan-African Council is also to actually take people that have certain privileges, because we all have different levels of privileges, whether it's economic, ability to travel, whatever it may be, go to the African continent or go to these communities, go to these entrepreneurs, get to know the country. And once you feel that connection, right, because investment is not, people think it's only rational numbers. No, you actually have to like the country, you have to enjoy the people. And if you're going to invest at that level, and I'm not talking about stock investing and all of these kind of things, because we're talking about actually investing into entrepreneurs and becoming basically partners with them. You have to go to the country and you have to get to know them face to face. And that's been one of the things that has driven our investors to look at Africa in a very different way, and then creating these new sorts of partnerships.
You know, most people, when they talk about Africa, and that's the danger of, just saying Africa. Africa is made up of how many countries? Like
55 countries.
55 countries. And we just categorize in general. However, you can say for certain that Africa is has potential.
Definitely. And of course, as you said, it's not a uniform place, right? There's different dynamics moving across the continent in different ways. Yeah. But I think there's one sort of uniting force, which is the dreams and aspirations of the youth. I find they're the same across Africa, regardless of what's going on in politics, geopolitics. The youth now are talking about a different kind of vision for the continent and their countries. So my focus has really been on tapping into that energy, right? And looking at building a model, because I don't believe that we can necessarily change the system by bare revolution alone. We have to build an alternative model, right? And that's what I'm looking at now, is who is thinking about a new model for Africa.
Oh my gosh, Fabien. Oh, Fabien. Isn't it just amazing, though, that in spite of the issues that Africa is plagued with as a continent, there's so much innovation that comes out of that place. I've seen videos of kids. I mean, now we live in digital era, so you can see a lot of things happening across. You see little potential engineers. What can you tell diasporans about investing in these young people? What are the opportunities to go there and support thriving future engineers and innovators, and creating economic opportunity even for themselves?
Absolutely. Well, there's a number of things going on the continent, and I think a good entryway is looking at what's being done with the youth now. So again, that's part of the African Union Agenda 2063. If you look at what Rwanda is doing now with the Youth Connect, right? Mm-hmm. Over there, which gathers, I think, 5,000 youth around the continent, bringing some of the best talent together. We're also organizing or co-organizing an event next year. Is going to be called the Global Black Youth Festival as well, which is going to bring 500 to 600 disruptors from the diaspora and the African continent together to start brainstorming and finding solutions together. So it's really just plugging into where the youth are and where those conversations are happening. If you look at East Africa, what's going on in Kenya, in different parts of Ghana, even Nigeria, in the tech space, you have youth now creating all sorts of applications and thinking about innovative solutions. So thanks to the internet today, it's much easier to plug into these things, right? But sometimes we don't, the word doesn't get out enough. And that's where media like you are so important to get the word out and to share that amongst those of us that are concerned about these things.
I really hope that they're paying attention because, like you said, the youth is the future of the continent. I mean, the youth is the bloodline of any family. Yes. If everybody's become geriatric, that's it, we're dead. So let me ask you about something practical for everybody. What does it take to become a business person? Because we're talking about business and we're encouraging people to go out and invest. Do you have to have any special skills to become a business person? Because I tell you what, I never looked at myself like a businesswoman. But I find out that even doing my media, I still have to have a business mind. I have to think that way.
Yeah. And I like the word entrepreneur more than business, because business makes a certain assumption about what you're in it for. So an entrepreneur is from the French word entreprendre, so to undertake, to take something, right, and bring it to a different level. Entreprendre. Yeah, entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Entreprendre. So this is what Africans have done forever, right? We undertake, and that's how we survive. And so it's really having that sort of mental disposition, right, to undertake something, seeing an issue, and then finding a solution to it, which we do on a daily basis. And then now they give it fancy terms, right? You call it business, whatever, investors. But if you have a child, right, that child, you undertook the life of somebody, right? If you're a mother or father, you've undertook that life and you're investing in it. Do the same for your business.
That is awesome. I never looked at it that way. Now I feel much better because, you think of the business person, which now we call entrepreneur, as someone in suit, that's like a banker or something that has all these skills. What does it, however, take to be a successful business person or entrepreneur?
So for me and my personal experience, I think it takes long-term thinking, right? Which is one of my challenges, especially working now with this new generation, because there's sort of a lack of patience, right? And to undertake anything, how long does it take for a child to grow, right? From birth, 18 years is an adult, right? Or she is an adult. The same thing has to happen with our businesses, right? We can't just quit and, after a few months or try to get fast money, right? Which I think is a lot of the mentality of some of our leadership, even in politics. They get into politics for business, to make quick money, but they're not actually building the framework we need in order to have the institutions and the vibrant economy we need to have abundance in general. So I would say long-term thinking and perseverance are the two main things.
Does passion have anything to do, or you can just see an opportunity and grab it?
Definitely. I mean, passion is really what and if you look at passion in a way that it's really about connecting people, right? And so if you're really passionate about it, it means that you're about the people that are involved, right? And if you continue with that, with the perseverance, with the long-term thinking, you'll be successful. You'll be successful because you won't let go of your dream, right? If you're not passionate about it, and I think this is what happens because market economics has taught us that let's try to make money as quickly as possible, you're not going to persevere. You're not going to continue. You're not going to have that internal strength to lead to success.
Are you saying that if I have passion for something, even though I'm not making money right now, if I stick with it long enough, I could?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, a lot of businesses start with very little resources, right? So it also takes a lot of creativity, right? There's other talents that will come in, resourcefulness, and also sometimes it's also who you know. So somebody that, if you don't have the resources, maybe someone that you know has the resources to make your dream happen. And it's also making sure that you communicate your dream, right? And that's how we like to look at entrepreneurs as well, is not only seeing what they're doing on the ground, but what resources do they need, right? And so I would apply that to your own projects and life. Is who do you need to know to be successful?
Exactly.
Find mentors, find the capital you need, and create a very, direct and persevering path to where you need to be.
It's tough because sometimes investors or potential capital resource wants you to have taken it to a certain place. So how can you find some kind of resources while you wait for that potential capital resource?
Well, the classic response to that is the three Fs, right? Family, friends, and fools.
Oh.
So those three people that are willing to invest in you at a very early stage.
Yes.
But there may be short-term sacrifices that you do have to make, right? Even if it means diminishing your quality of life for a short period, right? Or taking on a job, and that money you're reinvesting it into your idea. So I believe it's all about sacrifice at that point. And again, who you know, right? If you have one of those three Fs that are willing to invest in you, friends and fools.
Fools.
Exactly.
Who's the fool? The person who give you money without thinking?
Yeah, without taking. But maybe your idea is so crazy,
yes,
right? That someone actually says, all right, let me put some money into this.
Something else.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my fool right now. Somebody just love me, love what I'm doing. Tell me, what drives you, Fabien? You do so many, you're passionate actually about this. Yes. What drives you?
I think what drives me really is having traveled, I believe I've traveled to more than 100 countries.
Wow.
In my lifetime. And understanding that a lot of people were going through the same suffering around the world. And also understanding that the scarcity in general, right, because we live in a market capitalist system which creates scarcity, is the root cause of much of our problems, right? Whether it be poverty, inequality, violence, right? Not having abundance is a problem in our world today. And I think that for humans to continue to survive on this planet, given everything that's going on in terms of biodiversity loss, in terms of climate change and everything that's damaging the environment today, we need to start having an abundance conversation, right? Because the scarcity model of development and the consumption model of development has limits. And we're seeing that even in the West today. If you look at the mental health of people in developed countries, in places like economically developed, I'll say that, according to GDP figures and these sorts of paradigms, France, United States, there's a lot of inequality, there's a lot of suffering, there's still a lot of violence, right? Mental health issues. And so we need to start looking at things from a public health perspective. And that's really what drives my passion, is really what actually makes our societies, our communities healthier as a whole, right?
That's interesting. That's a very interesting perspective. Now, as people of African descent, and I love us, but we have some impediments. That scarcity that you talk about, sometimes I find that we have a scarcity mindset where we're competing with each other and not helping one another. How can we change that and work together, be more collaborative?
So the scarcity mindset again was given to us, right? Because usually, mostly in most countries, the minority group, and we're all fighting for a very small piece of the pie. So if they only give you this size, small piece of the pie, and everybody is fighting in there, then that drives scarcity mindset. So I think the first step is understanding that the pie is bigger, and we can define it in different ways. We don't have to define it how it was delivered to us. So just take the African continent. Everything is there to be done in the African continent. That's a massive pie, right? Even within our own communities. And we have to look at it holistically and understand that our collective success, right, supersedes our personal success. And if you look at every single, I would say, Black African diaspora entrepreneur that gets to a certain level to the top, it gets very lonely at the top. And it gets lonely because you become isolated from your people, from your community, and then that's when we talk about philanthropy and investing back. But if we have that mindset when we start, in the process of being successful, we'll be able to lift up more people along the way. So it's really a change in mindset.
What's the danger of that loneliness up there? What if something happened?
Well, what if something happened? Well, I guess the loneliness at the top is sometimes, I think it's almost pathological, in a way. And people.
That's what I'm driving at.
Yeah.
If you don't help more people grow.
Yes.
And God forbid something happened and economically things took a downward turn, you have nobody else to turn to.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, look at the case of South Africa, right? You have, since apartheid, a very small class of people that have risen to the top, Black South Africans. Most of the power still is in is in white hands in South Africa, and you have an extreme case of inequality. So the people that are isolating themselves at the top are also living this violence on a daily basis. Not only the people that are in situations of poverty, etc., but also the people at the top have to now barricade themselves in this world. And I don't think that's the world we want to live in, right? It's not a healthy world to live in. So there's a lot of dangers of being at the top. And again, from a public health perspective, I don't think that's the best possible outcome for Africans, for people of African descent, and the world in general. Right? So we need to have more creative models about how we develop our societies.
I'm glad you mentioned South Africa because the recent spate of violence, xenophobic violence against each other. What's the reason for that? Do you know? Have you thought about it?
So I think the anti-African xenophobia that we've seen in South Africa today, again, relates back to scarcity and a scarcity environment, right? If you look at the history of South Africa and how some of the promises that were laid out by the Reconciliation Committee, by sort of Nelson Mandela's dream for the country have not materialized today. And you fast forward now, 20, 25 years, and people are still, living in situations of poverty and extreme inequality and violence. That's when it creates a lot of tension in a society because of that scarcity. And one of the things that most surprised me when I first started spending time in South Africa is if you go at 5 p.m. when people get off work and you just look around in the streets, you see a long line of black people, right, lining up to take the taxi van back to their townships. So even in the places of business where the economic power is and where the economic centers are, what has changed in 25 years, right? They're still serving these enterprises and they're still having to go back to their townships. So that situation of scarcity, I think, creates a lot of animosity towards those that are possibly coming to the country and succeeding better than them. Those frustrations are most easily taken out on the weak. And I believe that's the situation in South Africa today.
That's really sad, and for me, it almost feels like racism against each other because you, as a country, as a people, went through this barbaric apartheid, and now, and during that time, all these Africans were fighting for you. And then you turn around and lynch them. I don't get it, you're not a psychotherapist, but help me understand, because you're in the business of counseling governments, maybe not on psychology and mental health, but you've lived in South Africa.
I think the more appropriate word is probably tribalism over racism, right? So
Tribalism?
Yeah, tribalism, because even if we're talking about African people, and African people coming into a new space and trying to set up their lives there, right? Whether they're Nigerians, Ethiopians, whatever it may be in South Africa. And there is a superiority sort of attitude towards those other people, right? So that's a sort of tribalism. It can't be racism because everybody is African, everybody's black, And so that's for one part, defining that it is some sort of tribalism, because I believe the word xenophobia is a misnomer for South Africa. In the media, if you look at the mainstream media, they talk about xenophobia, but why are they not attacking white businesses? Why are they not attacking Chinese businesses?
Wouldn't they coin a word Afrophobia or something?
Afrophobia, right. Exactly. Or I specify it with anti-African xenophobia. You can use a specifier in front of it to make it more accurate. And again, it's because they're at the bottom, the immigrants that come there are the easiest targets for them to attack. And I think the root cause, again, as I said, is scarcity, but even one level above that would be the education system, right? And if you look at the situation of the levels of education and how the school system is not teaching what black South Africans or South Africans in general should be learning regarding their own history and how other Africans helped in that fight, right? Or school sometimes is even too expensive for some people because of the situation of poverty they're in, so the kids don't go to school. How are they going to gain this knowledge and this sort of Pan-African mindset if they don't have the right education to start with? So that creates all of the factors and all of the possibilities for this sort of tribalism to happen and violence to be expressed in that way.
That is true, because that's reminiscent of what happens here sometimes. Not that there's violence, but sometimes our African American brothers and sisters feel that Africans from the continent don't appreciate them and don't appreciate their journey. And sometimes that they're a little elitist. And sometimes I have a son, and he tells me, he says, Mom, I don't think you African parents understand what we go through as black people. Right. And that's true, and I say to myself, when I was growing up in Africa, I was more aware of tribalism, not racism, and that kind of thing. But when you are born here, you are so aware of your position as a black person. I grew up where everybody looked like me. And I go, yeah, so my antenna is not tuned to somebody. If someone could have said something racist and I wouldn't even pick on it, because there's code, you know.
And I think, I mean, anytime you have an ism, it means a system, right? And it's a system of power.
Yes.
So tribalism enforces the view that one group should have more power over the other. The same happens with racism, right? And understanding the isms that exist in this world will help us have that empathy for other people, right? The African American experience is very unique, and there's a lot for us to learn from it, right? And empathize with that story. And it also opened a lot of doors across the world for different types of movements, right? And the way we look at our own human rights and existence on the planet. So, you know, once we are able to see ourselves in the other, I think that's when those isms start to break apart.
You know what, Madiba is looking at us and saying, I didn't pay that price for you all to do this. So we need to get it correct. Yeah. We need to get it correct.
Well, yeah. And I think Madiba's legacy is that really it was one of passing the torch.
Absolutely.
And if you look at also Winnie Mandela, who was really on the front line as well, we have to look at the strong women that were also pushing the movement at the time. Her legacy as well is one of passing the torch. And we should take those lessons that we learned from Madiba, from Winnie, and with this new generation now, how do we capitalize on those?
So how does the diaspora fit into this? How can we start? First, by bridging right here. Because we are not together out here. How are we going to help the continent?
Well, I look at the diaspora as sort of the collective brain of the continent, because we have such global understanding of what's going on in the Americas, in Asia, in Europe, wherever it may be. And if Africa is to use its diaspora, and I mean use in a positive sense, for its own empowerment, the sky's the limit. And that's why we've been really pushing with my organization, the Pan-African Council, is the reintegration of the diaspora, right? And allowing the diaspora not to because a lot of times we see that those in power in our countries often see the diaspora as a threat to their own positions. And we want to see, no, we're not a threat, we're partners, right? And we want to partner at all levels, whether it be at the civil society level, all the way up to the political level, that we come in as partners, right? And that we have an understanding of the world where we can make your country more resilient, or your community more resilient, or however you want to define it. But in its plurality, you're talking about Africa having a resilient Africa.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because, yeah, even the governments in Africa, on the continent, sometimes don't make it easy for diasporans to go out there and support. And most people in the diaspora want to do so much. If you look around, there are groups, communities, organizations out here, diaspora organizations, building hospitals, building clinics. Remittance is one of the ways that the diaspora has actually funneled and financed a lot of stuff on the continent. And yet we're seen as a threat. What do we need to do for them to see that we are partners?
Well, you know, that I think it's a multifaceted issue. Okay. One is there are many of those leaders are maintaining another ism, which we call neocolonialism, right? Which is again the view that their class is superior to the rest of the population, and including the diaspora, right? So to undo that ism, it will take a lot. It will take a lot, and really, I think for the diaspora to get engaged, it's really about us going back and building our alternative models and showing that abundance is possible, because they have a scarcity mindset. They think that only they could be at the top and only they should benefit from the corporatism and all of these things, right? And sometimes they do it in collusion with people, countries, businesses, multinationals that don't have the best interest of our people in mind. And so in order to break that, we have to be very sensitive, and we need to have the civil society engaged and have an understanding of that, right? If the civil society isn't engaged in the country and isn't talking about these issues in a real way, then they'll just continue with the pillage of the country. Because you cannot have corruption in a country without collusion from within. So you can blame Europe, you can blame the colonizers all you want, but for those colonizers to really pillage a country, you need internal collaboration for that. And where does it come from, right? It's from these people that have scarcity mindset at the top, and they're thinking short term.
I like that word, collusion.
Yeah.
There is collusion that's going on. So maybe the diaspora, we should just, and I don't want to say we because we are all Africans, the diaspora should, be the bigger person, maybe be patient and hope that, and not get discouraged, because it's really tough. In 2018, the African Union Citizens and Diaspora Directorate appointed you. What's that position and what's the mission of that office that you're holding right now?
Well, so in the CEDO office, Citizens and Diaspora Directorate, is a call on the diaspora from actors in the diaspora that are mobilizing the diaspora all over the world. And really it's a work group. It's a work group that works to advise the African Union, first to have a collective intelligence of what is going on in diaspora today. What are the major movements in the diaspora? Who are the major actors, right? And two, to also disseminate information about the African Union to the diaspora. If you go to Brazil today and you speak to your average Afro-Brazilian and ask him, what do you know about the African Union? They won't know everything, right? So part of that initiative is also to educate people that yes, the African Union exists, yes, it's looking at the diaspora, and yes, it's looking at ways to reintegrate the diaspora into the African continent. And three, again, is to develop mechanisms that help the diaspora reintegrate into the African continent. So making policy recommendations to African countries, the scorecard now that is being developed, in order to really get a sense of which African countries are performing the best in terms of reintegration of the diaspora.
That's so amazing. You are just a consummate Pan-Africanist, diasporanist, if there's such a word. I'm curious to know, coming to the end, when was the first time you went to Africa? Because you are more African than the Africans in some way. You're so aware.
Well, I would say from age 0, because I've always been surrounded. Just because you're in the Caribbean, just because you grew up in an African American community, you are in Africa.
Yeah.
You're living it, right? So Africa, I wouldn't necessarily confine Africa to a geographical location, right? Africa can also be what we live every day. I went to school in China, right? I went to my university, my master's degree was all in Asia, but there was large African communities in China at the time. And at the time, in my university, we were debating African issues in Chinese with my colleagues that had learned Chinese there. So, Africa is born within us in that sense, genetically, environmentally, in our communities. It's always been there. And my view of the entire movement and what's going on in Pan-Africanism is that one day, us as collectively as Africans can get along and figure out a system that creates enough abundance for us. That will be the solution to all of humanity's issues. So we should be leading it.
What is your one thing that you want Africans on the continent, in the diaspora, to know about why it's really vital that we work together?
I think it's vital that we work together because, one, I feel like this effort is really the last hope to make this earth survivable and enjoyable as it is. I think we're in a position of moral authority in terms of our own experience on Earth with the economic systems that we've experienced, and all the way from colonialism to slavery to capitalism to late state capitalism, and we have the solution for what post-capitalism would look like, right? And how we can create an abundance economy. Because the continent is basically virgin, and we can build the infrastructure that will define how human beings will live into the future. And there's no better group of people to do it now, taking advantage of the natural resources we have under the ground, taking advantage of all of the natural beauty and the human talent that exists, and creating that new system. We can shift the paradigm. Just because we've been delivered this paradigm for the past 500 years plus, doesn't mean that new paradigms can't come about. And I think there's an African solution to the world crisis that we're living in today.
You said it, and I agree with you. We were number one, and we are number one, but we have been so conditioned to think that we are not, and that we need to change that, shift that paradigm, and get back on track. My gosh, what's next for you? Are you doing all these things? Are you ever getting discouraged?
Never. I never get discouraged. I think the youth, and seeing their dreams and their ideas come to life is really inspirational, and that never discourages me. And I think it gives a greater insight, and I'm constantly learning. I don't have all the answers, and sometimes you find the answers in unexpected places, and that keeps me motivated.
Unexpected places. You find people of African descent in unexpected places where you least expect. I was surprised to find that Africans, even in Pakistan, when you think about the heritage, we are everywhere, and there's no reason why we shouldn't thrive. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Un bon plaisir.
Un bon plaisir.
Yes.
Au revoir.
Yes. Enchanté.
Enchanté.
À bientôt. And this is Pamela Anchang on Africa Speaks.